This is the story of India's greatest and most powerful leader of his time, who changed the course of history. This is the story of how Prince Siddhartha, who used to live in a palace, turned into Gautam Buddha. And this is the story of India's glorious past, when it taught the whole world how to live and what the real point of life is. From India's glorious past to today's scientific and spiritual paths, this never-ending stream still helps millions of people figure out what life is all about. This is the tale of a prince who came to his mother in a dream as a white elephant before he was even born, a prince who grew up in a palace surrounded by many apsaras and luxury items. When this prince saw a poor person, another dead person, he was inspired to learn the secret of the universe. This made him wonder, if this life is a lie, why do we waste our lives on luxury? And that was where it all began. This special presentation tells the story of how that prince became Buddha. That was 2,500 years ago, when India's Vedic civilization was popular, but as time went on, it became showier. Instead of seeing knowledge and education as the most important thing, Brahmin society started to put family first. This meant that there were only two ways to be saved. Either a person stops eating and drinking as a form of penance and gives up on life, or they go to heaven after giving up on life through the paths of rituals. In simple terms, there was an extreme version of every system. But Buddha taught the middle way, which was ahead of his time and against society. When you pull on the strings of a veena too hard, they break. And if you don't tighten the next one, you can't hear the music. When the tension of the string is just right, neither too loose nor too tight, melodic music comes out. In the same way, he talked about taking the middle path in life. There's a peepal tree in Gaya, which is now in Bihar. This tree is now known as the Bodhi tree around the world. This prince, Siddhartha Gautama, became Buddha under this tree. Buddha means, quote, the enlightened one. Buddha became enlightened under this peepal tree, and the religion of enlightenment began here. The word Buddha comes from a title that means, quote, one who is awake, which means, quote, a person who has become aware of reality. A Buddha is someone who knows about the cycle of life and death, but doesn't fall in love with it. A Buddha is also someone who is free from the bonds of worldly illusion. People think that Gautam Buddha, whose real name was Siddhartha, was born about 2,600 years ago in Nepal, a beautiful country in the Himalayas. In Buddhist countries, the day Buddha was born is known as Vaishakha Day. For Gautama to grow up as a great king, his father, King Shuddhodana, kept him from learning about religion or suffering. King Shuddhodana said that no poor, old, or religious people should come along Siddhartha's path, but what had to happen, happened. Siddhartha saw an old man and a monk. They were different from him in how they looked, which made him wonder if he too would get weak as he got older. Everyone has to get old and sick at some point, so they should look for the meaning of life when that time comes, and everyone should try to find out the truth. When Gautam was 29, he left home. He lived a life of austerity and discipline. After 49 days of continuous meditation, he reached Bodhi under the Bodh tree, a peepal tree in the village of Bodega in the state of Bihar. After that, Buddha gave his first sermon in Sarnath, a village in Uttar Pradesh, near the city of Banaras. The turning of the wheel of Dharma is the name for this event. Buddha kept telling people about the middle way for the rest of his life. And a lot of people used to come to his lectures. He died at the age of 80. This happened in 483 BC, and he died in a place in Uttar Pradesh called Kushninagar. This event is called Mahaparinirvana. Buddhism is the world's fourth largest religion, with over 52 crore adherents who all live their lives according to Gautam Buddha's teaching. Also, there are two kinds of people who follow this. The first are people who believe in Theravada, the oldest belief. Others are Mahayana Buddhists, who mostly live in India. In India, Brahmana, or Tantra Veda, is also a part of Buddhism, along with Buddha's early teachings. Based on the four truths of life, all people who follow Buddha believe that the goal of life is to be free from suffering, which leads to nirvana. It's interesting to hear these stories, but putting them into practice seems just as hard and strange. It's not easy for anyone to live alone, away from society, and then change how society works, as if it were a rare event. People who do this are known as, quote, pioneers of the age. Listen to the next episode to learn more about what happened in Buddha's life. Gautam Buddha was born in 567 BC in a place called Lumbini, Nepal. His father's name was Shuddhodana, and he was the leader of the Shaka dynasty. However, the Pali-written early act says that Shuddhodana was a king. His mother was the queen of the Koliya dynasty. Her name was Mahamaya. Many stories are associated with Buddha's birth, known as Jataka tales. Buddhism says that the point of all Jataka stories about Buddha's life is to teach people how to be good people. According to the Jataka stories, the birth of Lord Gautam Buddha was one of the many times God visited Earth. In these stories, the Buddha is shown going from one life to another and getting better and better as he goes. In Pali and Bodhanta, there are stories about the previous life of the Buddha that are popular in Theravada Buddhism. It is thought that he gave them to his followers as Jatakas while he was still alive to teach them morals and values. There are 547 stories like this, but more were created in the north of Thailand and Laos over time and are known as Panasa Jataka. Historians say there is no clear proof that these Jataka stories are true. A Jataka story says that his mother had a dream about him before he was born. A beautiful white elephant gave the queen a lotus flower and then moved into her body. When the sages were asked to figure out what the dream meant, they said the queen would have a son who would either become a great ruler or a great ascetic. It was said that he would either take over the whole world or become the Buddha, a being who has seen the truth. Some other stories say that when the Buddha was born, King Shuddhodana held a ceremony to celebrate. Shuddhodana asked the state's top astrologer to come to the event. The sight of Buddha as a baby astounded astrologers. When one of the most experienced astrologers looked at Buddha's planetary constellations, he figured out that Maharaja Shaka Kumar would have only two options. He would either become a great ruler or a great monk. 7 of the 8 astrologers there said the same thing. But Drishta Kundinya, the youngest and wisest of them all, said, "I challenge all the astrologers in the state. This is Shaka Kumar's destiny, and he will become a great monk." The baby was given the name Siddhartha at the naming ceremony, which means, quote, he who is devoted to perfection. When King Shuddhodana heard this, he was terrified. He thought, why would their prince decide to become a monk? He will rule because he is the son of a king. There has never been a time when the king's son became a monk. So, from the time Siddhartha was a child, King Shuddhodana gave him palaces full of luxury and fun, so he would never think about becoming a monk. The stories say that 3 different palaces were built for him to live in. During the summer, Siddhartha used to stay at a summer palace with a pond full of white lotuses. The second palace was for the winter season and had a pond full of red lotuses. The third palace was for the rainy season and had blooming blue lotuses. The prince's life was set up so that not even a shadow from the outside world could fall on him. Shuddhodana knew that no one had ever become a monk by living in palaces and hanging out with girls. 7 days after Siddhartha was born, his mother died. After that, Mahaparajapati Gautami, Mahamaya's sister, raised him. Siddhartha grew up in luxury. He learned how to shoot an arrow, fight, wrestle, swim, and run from Brahmins who didn't know much about the outside world. Siddhartha got married to Yasodhara when he grew up. Rahul was the name of Siddhartha's son, who was born to his wife, Yasodhara. Siddhartha became increasingly cut off from the outside world after getting married. Now, King Shuddhodana was sure that Siddhartha would never be able to become a monk. We can say that he had everything, which is why he didn't pay attention to the outside world. King Shuddhodana would ask him about everything he did and wouldn't let even a shadow of society fall on him. Even Shuddhodana was now sure that after living such a happy life, it would be hard for anyone to leave it. The king thought all of this was a good idea. The royal family thought everything was going well. But Siddhartha, one of the most important people at the time, was not yet up to date. He was destined to become a Buddha, but that wasn't happening yet. As soon as Siddhartha was born, astrologers made different predictions. One important thing they said was that he would become a great monk. That is, he will leave the palace, which is bad for the royal family in every way. Since Siddhartha was a child, his father, Shuddhodana, tried in any way he could to make him king. Even though he tried hard, Siddhartha's mind would wonder about the great mysteries of life and death. Think about it. Would it have been easy to hide the truth about society if you were Siddhartha? Sometimes you might think, what kind of life is this? Do all people spend their lives in palaces? Siddhartha often wondered if this world was only about palaces and if there was any truth to the idea that there was more to life than palaces. He was eager to learn about the rest of the world. King Shuddhodana also had a hard time hiding the outside world from the prince for a long time. Then, Siddhartha left the palace one day. The pomp and luxury of his life might have made him think he should know and learn more. They must have also known that there is life outside of this palace, since Siddhartha had already enjoyed all of life's physical pleasures. 3 palaces with all the comforts were built for Siddhartha, and plans were made for him to learn martial arts and other important subjects for running the state. There were dances, songs, and other fun things to do. The maids and servants were ready to serve him, and everything was going well. The prince was busy with his life, and Shuddhodana was less worried about him as well. Then, one day, Siddhartha told his friend and companion Chandak that he wanted to go for a walk. When Chandak heard this, he told King Shuddhodana, and the king's worry grew even more. Shuddhodana did everything he could to stop Siddhartha from becoming a monk. After making all the arrangements, Siddhartha finally started his journey. He is very happy to see the outside world. The outside world has lots of things that impress him, like green trees and plants, birds singing, wild animals, rivers, ponds, and beautiful villages. But when he started walking back to the palace, he met an old man. When Siddhartha saw him, he was shocked. After all, he'd never seen anyone like that before. He asked his friend Chandak, "Who is this man? Why is he walking bent over with a stick?" Chandak kept quiet, but when Siddhartha asked him repeatedly, he said that the person had grown old. Siddhartha kept asking, "What is old?" Chandak replies, "Prince, when you get old, your body gets weak. After a certain age, everyone gets old, and your ability to think and understand gets worse. Once upon a time, this person must have been just like us, strong, like a young man. But everyone gets old one day. This is how life works." Prince Siddhartha didn't even know that people get old. Who could have thought that everyone has to get old one day, and there will come a time when he too will grow old? Can you think about what his life must have been like when he was young? He must have lived in a nice palace. What kind of schedule would he have? the one who didn't even know until more than 20 years into his life that everyone gets old at some point? Up until that time, Siddhartha was like a child. He didn't even know how big the world was. All he knew was to ask questions, and he knew how to ask his parents different kinds of questions. But his father didn't let him ask such questions, and one day the truth of society and the cycle of life became clear to him. Now that he was getting more interested, he wanted to learn more about society. For this reason, he started going on trips more often, and his old friend Chandak went with him. When he ran into a beggar on one of these trips, he had the same thoughts again. He asked Chandak, "What sort of person is he? Why does he wear old, worn-out clothes that no one else does?" Chandak told him that he was a poor man. If someone doesn't have a place to live and can't find enough food to eat, they have to beg. And that's how he lives. In the same way, whenever Siddhartha saw something new on the walk, he would ask questions, and Siddhartha's friend Chandak would always answer. Siddhartha kept seeing the truth about society, and as he learned more about it, he also started paying more attention to social norms and practices. One day, they met a group of people taking a man from his deathbed for his funeral rites. Siddhartha is surprised and asks, "What kind of person is this, Chandak? We've never seen anyone carried on the shoulders of 4 people before, and there are so many people going after him." Chandak tells the prince, "Prince, this person has died. His time on earth is over." Siddhartha asks, "What is death? What does, quote, life is over mean?" Chandak replies, "Prince, everything living born into this world must die one day. That is, the one who is born will also die, and one day everyone gets death by the law of the earth." Siddhartha's mind was less confused now. He knew that everyone would die one day, and that he too would die one day. Now that he knew the truth, he was restless. He wanted to understand these questions about life and death. These inquiries troubled Siddhartha, who one day came across a monk wearing saffron clothing. Chandak said that when the monk retires, he no longer has to take care of his family and keeps looking for the truth through penance. Siddhartha now wanted to know if there is life after death and if people can be born again. It is said that when Siddhartha went to his palace, he saw an old man who couldn't walk, a sick man, a dead man, and a man who lived alone. In Buddhism, these 4 scenes are called the, quote, 4 heavenly places. Siddhartha was very upset when he saw all of this, so he decided he would no longer live in the palace. He'd made up his mind to leave the palace, but he couldn't tell his father or his wife Yasodhara about this. If he had done that, his wife might not have let him leave the palace, or she might have followed him. But Siddhartha was adamant that he would have to leave the palace if he wanted to find out the truth. One night, he asked his friend Chandak to bring his favorite horse. Chandak knew that Prince Siddhartha was set on leaving the palace. Stories written in Pali say that before he left the palace that night, he went to his wife's room and saw Yashodhara sleeping. His son Rahul was sleeping next to Yashodhara. He wanted to tell her and get out of the palace. But he couldn't do that. His hands stopped on their own, so he took Chandak with him on his favorite horse and rode away. Some stories say that the palace's doors opened on their own and that the guards passed out for a while. Siddhartha gave up his inheritance and spent time learning how to deal with life's problems. He got the idea to leave the palace from that monk, whom he thought was very interesting. Siddhartha gave up his kingdom and his family and became a wandering hermit. He cut his hair to show that he had given up the worldly way of life. He began to call himself Gautam. He was now wearing old, torn clothes and was moving from place to place. He chose the hardest way to find the truth, by giving up food and water. He would sit the same way for hours or even days at a time. When his 5 people saw how hard he was trying to change, they thought of him as their teacher. He was now very thin, and his health was worsening because he ate very little. He did this hard penance for 6 years, but got nothing out of it. He did it because he thought it would help him become wise. He sat in meditation and ate only roots, leaves, and fruits. One day, he passed out because he was too weak. When he was asleep, a girl named Sujata woke him up and fed him kheer. Gautam started to think that neither my life of luxury in the palace nor my life as a hermit in the forest was the way to freedom. Seeing how he lived every day, he decided that if he didn't eat, he could only die and never find the truth. His followers had abandoned him now that he had resumed eating. People used to say that a monk who couldn't even fast could not be a teacher. Now, Gautam's biggest problem was figuring out which way to go. He lived and studied with the most intelligent teachers of his time so that he could get to know the secret of the truth of life and death. None of them knew how to end the suffering, so he continued the search on his own, during which he wandered for many days. One day, he saw a person playing the veena. If the veena player tightened the strings too much, the music didn't sound good, and if he left the strings too loose, the music still didn't sound good. He then concluded that if you pull on the strings of a veena too hard, they break, and if you let them hang loose, you can't hear the music. The string should be neither too loose nor too tight. In the same way, Gautam talked about taking the middle path in life. On the day of the full moon in May, he sat under the Bodhi tree, thought deeply, and said, quote, "I won't leave this place until my sorrow is over." The stories say that when he was deep in meditation, people tried many times to wake him up. During the night, Mara would try to stop the meditation many times. First, he sent his 2 beautiful daughters to make Gautam happy. At last, he sent his armies of demons with weapons, but they failed. When Gautam comes out of his meditation, he says that this is when he became enlightened. He found out what caused suffering and how to get rid of it. Gautam became the Buddha when he realized he had learned and understood how things really are. Now he was sharper, had more energy, and was more eager than ever to bring about change. He became known as Shakyamuni Buddha after that. Find out what happened next by listening to the next episode. Gautam had reached Subodhi at this point. He attained Subodhi under a peepal tree around 2,500 years ago. At age 35, he became Gautam Buddha. This event is called the turning of the wheel in Buddhism. After he got Subodhi, he had another big question. Should he tell everyone about the path he's found? Will people agree with him that the middle path is the best way to live? Then he decided to share this information with the people and show society a new way of spiritual practices. He first went to Sarnath, which is now the city of Varanasi. There he encountered the same 5 people who had once refused to follow Buddha as their teacher. Before he got there, the stories say, the 5 decided they would not help the Buddha in any way. But as soon as Buddha got there, one of them took his kamandal and the other started washing his feet. Another began to sweep a bed. Sitting under the peepal tree, Buddha gave his first sermon at this spot in Sarnath. He said, "In life, we have to give up 2 extremes, lust and torturing our bodies. I've tried to find a middle way between these 2 extremes. This middle way connects our soul to the rest of the world. This middle way makes us feel like we are part of the earth. This path in the middle has 8 parts, which in the end lead each person to the ultimate truth." Buddha said that he had come to a full understanding of human suffering and what caused it. Ignorance was the cause of this pain. He also provided solutions that are now called the, quote, 4 Noble Truths. Buddha advised his followers to avoid extreme and strict austerity and abstain from the world's excesses of pleasure. He instead told them to take the middle path. He said that each person is responsible for their own happiness. The core ideas of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path are what Buddhism is all about. The Sanskrit root word Buddha means to wake up. Buddha means a person who has become fully aware and knows the truth about life. Swami Vivekananda called it detachment. Buddha was just like me, you, and everyone else before discovering the truth about life. After that, he became an extraordinary person. He found a way that anyone from any caste could use. There was no caste system, and the upper classes did not have the most power. Anyone can walk on this path. The only requirement is that they should want to. The first Buddha was not Siddhartha Gautama. This order has been going on for a long time. He was neither a prophet from God nor a supernatural being. Buddha never said that there was only one God who made everything. He pointed out that a great Dharma runs through everything on earth. If you follow this Dharma, you can find true wisdom and compassion, leading to freedom from suffering. At the same time, the only way to get past pain is to face it and keep living. Buddhism aims for two main things. The first is to know ourselves. The second is to learn what Buddha taught. To do this, we must first understand that people have two sides to them. One is our, quote, general nature, which is made up of bad feelings like fear, anger, and jealousy. Second, our true form is our inner form, which is the same for everyone and is pure and whole. Because God made everyone the same, we often hear that a person is what his circumstances make him. We are all 98% genetically the same. Buddhism calls this, quote, Buddha nature. The only thing that makes us different from Buddha is that we don't know who we are. Buddhism says that there are three main parts to life. The first is change, which shows that nothing in the world is stable or permanent. As for the second sign, we've already seen how the Buddha's suffering helped him gain his great spiritual gifts. Or you could just say that Buddha's pain led him to the spiritual path. The word suffering comes from the word dukkha, which means, quote, the generally unsatisfying and imperfect nature of life. This doesn't mean, though, that Buddhists think that life is all suffering. Buddhists believe that happiness exists, but that it is only temporary. It doesn't last. Even the most fortunate people have bad times. The third dimension is, quote, not me. Buddhists don't think that there is anything permanent or unchanging about people. They don't think that people have souls or selves. The concept of, quote, me is actually based on something that is not true at all. If we take a vehicle as an example, it can be broken down into its basic parts: the axle, wheel, arc, and side. In the same way, we also have a lot of parts: emotions, perception, mental activities, sense, consciousness, and other things are thought to be a part of our being. Based on these, everyone in the world can know the Four Noble Truths. To learn these truths, listen to the next episode. Once upon a time, a woman named Kisa Gautami lost her oldest son. She was so sad that she carried his dead body around the streets and begged for help to bring him back. But she didn't get any help. Finally, she met someone kind and smart. He took her to Buddha. Kisa Gautami asked Buddha for the same thing. Buddha told her, "Mother, bring me a handful of mustard seeds, and I'll bring your child back to life." When Kisa Gautami heard this, she was delighted and went to look for mustard seeds. But there was one thing that bothered her. Buddha also said that the seeds should come from a family where no one has died. As she moved from place to place, she became increasingly hopeless. She didn't find a single family in the village where no one had died. She felt hopeless, but she knew death was the only truth in the end. So Kisa Gautami finally returned to Buddha. She said, "I couldn't find a single family where no one had died. In every family, someone has died, and everyone dies. Now I get your point. and I get what you are trying to teach." Buddha smiled softly and said nobody could avoid death and sadness. If people think life will only bring them happiness, they will be let down. Buddha taught that four things in the world would never change. Buddha says the first truth is that the world is all about suffering. To put it simply, there is suffering. It has a cause, and it has an end. The second truth that Buddha taught is that there is a reason for everyone's suffering. The second truth tries to figure out why people must endure pain. According to Buddhism, suffering comes from two things: desire and ignorance. Desire is being interested in material things that bring happiness. Things like wanting to live forever are examples of this kind of desire, which can never come true. So wishing for them can only cause sadness. Ignorance makes this sadness even worse. Buddhist teachings say that suffering can end when you reach nirvana. When a person has reached nirvana, or the state of being free from suffering, he is free from the cycle of birth and rebirth. Buddha also talked about how to get rid of sadness in his teachings. If you follow the Eightfold Path, as the fourth truth says, you can reach nirvana and be free from suffering. The Noble Eightfold Path is how Buddhist schools explain how to get to the end of suffering. The steps of the Noble Eightfold Path are right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right meditation, and right concentration. During his awakening, Buddha thought about the most critical questions in life and tried to find answers to them. He found out three critical things. He made these facts easy to understand so that everyone could grasp them. The first truth is that nothing is ever lost in the universe. Energy turns into matter, and matter turns into energy. A dead leaf falls to the ground and becomes soil. A seed grows into a new plant. Cosmic rays make up what's left of the old solar system. Our parents give birth to us, and we give birth to our children. If we use the scientific term, it will be the conservation of mass and energy. Buddha's second universal truth is that everything changes all the time. Life is like a river that moves and changes all the time. The river is smooth and soft in some places, so it sometimes flows slowly and sometimes quickly. Just when we think we are safe, something unexpected happens, like when dinosaurs roamed the earth. There came a time when all of them died, but that wasn't the end of life. Over time, new kinds of life, like small mammals, started to appear, and eventually humans appeared. The third truth is that things happen for a reason. This is the third thing the Buddha said was true for everyone. The law of cause and effect says that there are always new things happening because of what happened before, which is found in every modern science textbook. For example, love, action, and reaction. So science and Buddhism are the same. The law of cause and effect is called karma. We don't get things we don't deserve. We get what we earn, good or bad. We are who we are because of what we did in the past. Our thoughts and actions determine what kind of life we can live. If we do good things, we can live a good life. In the future, good things will happen to us. If we say and do bad things will happen to us in the future. Every second, we create more karma. If we know this, we don't need karma to teach us. It becomes our friend and shows us how to build a good future. After this, Buddha and his followers continued teaching Dharma in India for the next 45 years. He was kind and caring all the time. He helped everyone he met along the way, including beggars, kings, maidservants, and people from all walks of life. He used to be able to sleep anywhere at night. When he was hungry, he would ask for food. Buddha could get into people's hearts everywhere he went because he talked about how they felt. He told them not to listen to what he said about superstitions, but to think for themselves about whether what he taught was right or wrong, and then do what he said. He told everyone to be nice to each other and work on becoming better people. He never got mad or impatient, and he never mistreated anyone. He always taught in a way everyone could understand, even those who disagreed with him. Buddha was so good at speaking that everyone who heard him thought he was talking just to them. Buddha told his followers that they should help each other along the way. Buddha knew it would be hard for people to follow his teachings, so he set up 3 places where people could turn to him for help. Dharma is the right way. The Sangha is the guide or friend on the path. When someone with a good heart stands in front of a hermit or a beggar, they say the following hymn, quote, "I seek refuge in Buddha, I seek refuge in the Dharma, and I seek refuge in the Sangha." End quote. Taking refuge is the first step to enlightenment for a Buddhist. Even if a person doesn't reach enlightenment in this life, they have a better chance of doing so in a future life. Ordinary people are those who agree with the teachings. This is the highest honor in Asia, and any family member can leave the life of a homemaker. Sages and monks are not selfish at all. Instead, they spend their lives helping other people. They don't want to have a lot of possessions, money, or power. They give up these things to get something more valuable: spiritual freedom. By living a pure, simple life with others on the same path, they can reduce their greed, hatred, and ignorance. Monks and nuns live in monasteries, but they are still allowed to visit their families and take care of them when they are sick. So how is a life in a monastery? For Buddhist monks, the monastery is like a church. For the monk, the day at the temple starts early. They attend morning ceremonies and praise the Buddha long before dawn. Gatherings make people feel better and bring people together. Even though sanghas live a simple life, they have many responsibilities to take care of. Everyone does their job well and is happy. Some monks and nuns go to school during the day to teach and talk about the teachings of Buddha. Others may change and translate Buddhist sutras and books, make paintings of the Buddha, and take care of the temples and gardens. The last ceremony of the day takes place in the evening. Monks and nuns do their work and religious activities well and are highly respected. By living a pure, simple life, they gain a deep understanding of how things work. Even though their life is hard and rough, it's worth it because it keeps them healthy and strong. People who live in or visit the temple work with the Sangha and follow the same program. They live and work with people like you and me. In the next episode, we'll learn how Buddhism is a global religion and how it has spread all over the world. Mahindra, King Ashoka's son, brought Buddhism from India to Sri Lanka for the first time in the 3rd century BCE. In the early centuries, traders and missionaries brought Buddhism to Southeast Asia. Big monuments like Borobudur and Angkor show the glory of Buddhism in places like Indonesia and Cambodia. In the 1st century CE, Buddhism made its way to China, where many sutras were translated to Shastraya Chinese. In the 4th century CE, Buddhism made its way to Korea and Japan. Before the 17th century, early travelers like Marco Polo and Christian missionaries told people in the West about Buddha and his teachings. By the beginning of the 20th century, many Europeans had traveled to the East to study Buddhism. Some of them became monks and gave the West ideas about Buddhism. In the 19th century, Chinese and Japanese immigrants brought many different kinds of Buddhism to the Americas. Today, there are many Buddhist centers in Europe, North America, and South America. If we're talking about the Theravedic Buddhism, then the only people who live in a Theravedic Buddhist monastery are monks. This monastery is in the jungles of Thailand. The huts that the monks live in are called kutis. Animals and bugs can't get in because they are built on stilts. Monks sit there and meditate, which is a big part of their spiritual lives. Each hut has a path in front of it. The monks clean the paths so they don't step on bugs and kill them. The monks gather in the morning and evening to meditate and pray. They are taken from monastery to monastery until they reach the temple. After a puja ceremony, they enter the temple to study the Dharma. Some monks and nuns spend their whole lives in the woods, while others live in temples in towns and cities. In Tibetan Buddhism, the temple has a lot of bright colors. It is decorated with many statues and wall hangings of Buddha. These are called tangas. On the altars, there are beautiful lamps and places to put incense. On the walls of the temple are big prayer wheels. Inside the wheels are strips of rice paper with mantras written on them. When we spin the prayer wheels, we say over and over again these phrases that have deep spiritual meanings. People can also hold prayer wheels in their hands. In a Japanese temple, monks chant Namo Amida Butsu to show Amida Buddha, the Buddha of eternal light, how grateful they are. They think their lives will be good if they say his name. There are other beautiful things on the altar, but the rice cake is the most important. Asian people depend a lot on rice. If you ask a young Japanese boy or girl what they ate today, they will probably say rice. Meditation in Japan is called Jain. Some of the main ideas of Chinese Buddhism are similar, but there are also some differences. Inside the main worship hall of the temple, there are more than 10,000 small statues of Buddha. Wu Chang said that the city of 10,000 Buddhas is a place where Buddhists live and where Buddhist students from all over the world come to learn. There are schools in the town, but you don't have to be Buddhist to go to them or live here. The morning ceremony at the temple starts the day at 4 a.m. Afterward, they bow down, meditate, and say the sutras. These events make everyone feel better and bring us closer together. At 8 a.m., everyone goes to work or school. In the Jataka stories, which are part of Buddhist literature, different forms of the Buddha and the stories about them are shown. Let's start with the first story, the story of a common man and the Monkey King. Once upon a time, Buddha came into the world as the king of 80,000 monkeys. He was a tall, strong man, and he was brighter than the sun. On the banks of the Ganges River, there was a mango tree as big as the moon in his kingdom. 80,000 monkeys were jumping from branch to branch, talking and eating very sweet and tasty fruits. Every so often, a ripe mango would fall into the river. One day, while walking downstream, the Monkey King came across a river palace where a human king lived. He told the monkeys that danger would soon come if the mango started to float down. Pick all the mangoes and flowers from the trees and take them to the deep forest. A mango, however, was hidden by a bird's nest, which 80,000 monkeys didn't care about. When it was big and ready, it fell into the river and floated down to where a human king was taking a bath. The king ate that delicious mango. He told his servants, quote, "Find all the mangoes and bring them to me right away, servants." The servants found a lot of mango trees in the middle of a deep forest. On the trees, there were 80,000 monkeys. When the human king found out about the monkeys, he was furious. He said, "Monkeys are eating my mangoes. Kill everyone." "Yes, sire," said the archers, and they drove the monkeys to the forest's edge. They ran to the Monkey King, shaking with fear, and asked him what they should do. "Don't worry," said their king. "I'll save you." He quickly stretched as far as possible and made a bridge over the rock. "Monkeys, run to the garden behind me," he said, and 80,000 monkeys ran away. When the human king saw what happened, he was shocked. He said, "This Monkey King almost died to save his whole army, and I'm just self-centered. I've learned a lot from this." Then he told his archers to stand down, because it wasn't right to kill the Monkey King. The human king forgot about the mangoes and went back to his palace by the river. He ruled the rest of his life in a kind and wise way. Let's move on to the next story. Injured Swan. Prince Siddhartha and his cousin Devduta were wandering through the forest one day and saw a swan. Devduta quickly pulled out his bow and shot the swan, killing it. Siddhartha got to the hurt swan, pulled out the arrow, picked it up, and hugged the poor bird. Devduta yelled at Prince Siddhartha in anger. "Give it to me! I shot it! I own it!" "I will never give it to you," the prince told him. "You will kill it. Let's ask the ministers in the court and let them make the decision." Each minister had a different point of view. Some said the swan should be given to Devduta, some said it belonged with Siddhartha. A wise minister said that the person who saves a life owns it, not the person who kills it. The swan then went to the prince. Prince Siddhartha took care of the swan until it could fly again. Then he set her free so she could live on her own with her kind. The Dalai Lama is the most important Buddhist priest in Tibet. He was in charge of Tibet's government until 1959, when the Chinese government took over. Before 1959, he lived in the Patola Palace in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, which was his official home. At age 5, he joined the local maths club and began training. The most influential monks in Lhasa also taught him. In 1950, when problems with China were starting to unfold, he took the throne at age 15, but he didn't finish school until he was 25. In the 1950s, China's government began to change. Plans were made to make Tibet officially part of China. But in March 1951, Tibetans took to the streets and demanded an end to Chinese rule. Supporters of the Chinese Communist Party, the ruling party, ended the rebellion, killing tens of thousands of people. During the uprising of 1959, the Dalai Lama and many of his followers left Tibet for India. Former Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru greeted him and offered him the right to set up the Tibetan government in Dharamsala. You might wonder about the process of choosing the Dalai Lama. Dalai Lamas are not chosen, they are found. Buddhists believe that the Dalai Lama can choose his own body. This is because Buddhists believe in the doctrine of reincarnation. When the reincarnated person is found, he becomes the next Dalai Lama. The search for the new Dalai Lama is managed by a partnership between the Golgupa High Lamas and the Tibetan government, and it can take many years. It took 4 years to find the 14th and the current Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso. The search is mostly restricted to Tibet. However, the current Dalai Lama has said there is a chance he won't be reincarnated, and if he does, it won't be in the country ruled by China. He says that there is no longer a need for the Dalai Lama institution, but he also said it was up to the people to keep this part of Tibetan Buddhism and the Dalai Lama lineage alive. The Dalai Lama has come up with a different idea. He might choose his heir before he dies. In that case, the Dalai Lama would act as a mentor to his successor. The Dalai Lama has also said that he will be reborn elsewhere if he dies outside Tibet. People worldwide have been interested in what the Buddha taught for nearly 2,500 years. His life and works have such a strong message that they reach people from all different cultures, religions, and parts of the world. His messages are becoming increasingly important in today's world, and they are helping people come up with a sustainable vision for the future. The fact that the COVID pandemic is still going on shows that the modern world is getting more complicated, which means there are more risks and crises. Terrorism, climate change, global warming, fundamentalism, extremism, and other threats shake people's consciences and cause despair. Since the beginning of time, humans have been trying to control natural resources. Greed and lack of care about how these resources are used have caused an imbalance. In response, nature is attacking people with even more force. In these hard times, Buddha's method of self-observation and awakening shows us the way. Indian culture and values include lessons about how to help all living things. We have an advantage and a responsibility to work for the good of society and the universe. Buddha's teachings focus on self-enlightenment. each person can be their own guiding light. Ideas and symbols from Buddhism have had a significant and apparent effect on our democracy. Above the speaker's chair in the Lok Subha, the words Dharma Chakra Pravartan are written, which means to keep turning the wheel of justice. In the preamble of the Constitution, the ideas of liberty, equality, and brotherhood are set, which can be traced back to Buddhist ideology. In his essay, The Ancient Regime, the State of the Aryan Society, B.R. Ambedkar says Buddhism is a revolution. Although it began as a religious movement, it was more than that. It also changed how people lived and how the government worked. On October 3, 1954, he said on All India Radio that his social philosophy could be summed up in 3 words: liberty, equality, and brotherhood. Ambedkar has busted many myths about where the ideas of freedom, equality, and brotherhood come from. He said that they came from the ancient teachings of Buddha. In his essay, quote, Buddha or Karl Marx, he says that society's goal is to build a new base. The French Revolution can be summed up in 3 words: fraternity, liberty, and equality, and that's why it was widely accepted. The Buddhists' idea of righteous behavior, wisdom, compassion, and the lack of greed can be used to build a new world order where violence and conflict are kept to a minimum and natural resources aren't exploited for development. As Buddha taught, you can find truth by taking the middle path and avoiding extreme positions, leading to different points of view coming together to an agreement to avoid conflict. Buddha's teachings have not only changed the spiritual landscape around the world, but it has also led to more ethical and sustainable ways of running businesses, governments, and social groups. Today, when we celebrate Buddha Purnima, we remember the day that Gautam Buddha was born, when he became enlightened, and when he died. The world looks to India with hope because it promotes Buddhist values like compassion and living together in peace. India has shown at international meetings that the best way to use limited natural resources is based on need, not greed. India has called for a global mass movement to change people's habits, to cut carbon emissions, and reach the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. Prime Minister Narendra Modi told the United Nations General Assembly on September 27, 2019, that we come from a country that gave the world Buddhism, not war. He was calling for everyone to work together to stop the threat of terrorism. Buddhism is the most important religion in history, but not because of its philosophy. It is important because it was the most influential religious movement, the biggest spiritual wave the world has ever seen, and there is no civilization that hasn't been affected by it in some way. Every country in the world has its own unique set of festivals. The history of festivals in India goes back thousands of years, and each one is celebrated differently. Whenever we think of Holi, we start to picture many bright colors. The Festival of Lights, Diwali, has a different kind of excitement. Around the world, there are a lot of different Buddhist festivals. The most important ones are about important events in the life of the Buddha. Some celebrations are only held in specific countries. People in Sri Lanka celebrate Poson Day. Vaishak Buddha Day is a holiday for all Buddhists. Buddhists use the lunar calendar. This means that the new moon is the first day of every month, so each month is made up of 29 days. The full moon and the new moon are important times of the month for Buddhists. Buddha Day, also called Vaishak, is the most important of all Buddhist festivals. The festival is a colorful celebration of Buddha's birth, knowledge, and death. The followers of Buddhism decorate their houses and hang paper lanterns. They also go to their local temples to serve, learn, and give gifts and alms to monks. Another important festival is Mak Puja, which is held in February. This day is also called Full Moon Day. On this day, monks meditate, chant, and listen to the sutras. In February, there is another festival, called Mahaparinirvana Day. On this day, people remember the passing of Buddha. Buddha knew his time had come when he was 81 years old. He lay on his bed and passed away peacefully. The lights on the temples are turned down for this event. In the dim light, people chant and meditate. Losar Farvir is another festival that is held in February. The Tibetan New Year, the most important Buddhist festival in Tibet, is celebrated on this day. It starts on February's full moon and goes on for 15 days. Aside from these, Hanamritsari is another festival that is celebrated on the 8th of April. This is a flower festival in Japan that is held on Buddha's birthday. People bring spring flowers as gifts to decorate temples and statues of Buddha. They also put incense on sticks on the idols of Buddha. The next important festival is Songkran, which takes place in April and lasts for 3 days. Songkran is the Thai New Year's holiday. During this time, people go to temples and offer food and flowers to the monks. Water is a big part of the Songkran festival. People often race boats down rivers. There are fireworks and dancing. Everyone watches the shadow puppet perform. On Buddha Day, many Buddhists give each other cards and gifts. They also often repeat Buddha's mantras and meditate. In Thailand, the festival's main event takes place at night when the statue of Buddha is taken out. People carry candles and walk around it 3 times. They put fragrant water on the idol. People in Sri Lanka celebrate Poson Day, which marks Buddha's birth. This is followed by Dharma Day in July, which is the date when Buddha first taught his Dharma. Kathina is an important holiday that is held in October or November. Based on Buddhist traditions and customs, some places have been given more importance than others. First, let's talk about Lumbini, where Buddha was born. Prince Siddhartha Gautama was born in Lumbini, which is in the southern part of what is now Nepal. The Ashoka Pillar is the oldest building in Lumbini. It marks the spot where Buddha was born. The Pushkarini Pond is just to the south of the pillar. People believe that Maya Devi took a bath there before she gave birth. The sacred garden in Lumbini is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a sign of peace in the world. After Lumbini, another important site is Bodh Gaya, which is currently in eastern Bihar. It is the most important site where Buddhists go to pray. This is where Siddhartha Gautama became enlightened after 49 days of meditation under the Bodhi tree. Here, the Bodhi tree is the most important place to pay respects. The Vajrasana, also called the hero seat, is under the tree. Another attraction here is the 52-meter-high Mahabodhi Temple. There are several other temples in the Mahabodhi Temple complex where the Buddha spent 7 weeks after attaining enlightenment. Bodh Gaya is now a World Heritage Site and a busy tourist spot. For many people, meditating under the Bodhi tree, where the Buddha himself sat, is an important spiritual experience. After Bodh Gaya, Sarnath is considered the most important place in Buddha's life. The Buddha's first sermon, called Dharma Chakran Pravartan, was given in Sarnath, and it describes the 4 noble truths and the Great Eightfold Path. Sarnath is where the Buddha chose his first group of followers to spread his teaching. The Dhamek Stupa, which Ashoka built, and the Ashoka Pillar are 2 of the most famous structures in Sarnath. Kushinagar is another important place for Buddhists. This is a spot where Buddha died. Buddha died in Kushinagar in eastern Uttar Pradesh when he was 81 years old. Based on Buddhist beliefs, a crucial site in Kushinagar is the Mahaparinirvana Temple, which houses a beautiful statue of Buddha in a sleeping posture. It is made of red sandstone and is 1,500 years old. Another important place is Til Orakat, which is in Kipal Vastu, Nepal. This is where Prince Siddhartha lived for his first 29 years. But some archaeologists think that Kapil Vastu is in Piprawa, 10 miles south of the Nepalese border, in the Indian state of Uttar Pradesh. Vaishali is also a significant city in the history of Buddhism. Besides these, Shravasti is also a very important place. Buddha stayed in Shravasti for 25 years. At the Jetavana Vihari, the Buddha gave 3 pratyaya sermons, including the well-known loving-kindness sermon. Rajgir is another important site. One of the most famous places in the area is Vulture's Peak, a quiet place where the Buddha used to meditate, and the Satapani Cave, where the first meeting of Buddha's followers occurred after the Buddha's death. In addition to this, Nalanda is another important place. Buddha spent a lot of time in Nalanda. Sariputra and Muglana, 2 of his most important followers, were from Nalanda.